Hi guys, I'm Brian Latimer, FLW Tour Pro. Today we're going to talk about frogging. I'm going to show you how to choose the correct frog for the correct situation. Frog fishing is a technique that everybody gets excited about. Getting those explosive strikes on a frog can be some of the best bites that you'll get all season. However, it can be a bit confusing trying to figure out which frog you need to use for each situation. And today I'm going to walk you through why I choose each frog and the capabilities that you need to look for in each frog to get the best out of your frog fishing. Number one is buoyancy. Some baits take on water and set on the water a little bit differently, and those baits work better for different situations. We'll talk about the buoyancy of every frog that I choose in this segment. Second thing we're going to talk about is frog profiles. Some of the baits are shaped and are weighted differently, and that causes those baits to work and act differently. And you need to know the differences between each bait so you can choose the right bait accordingly. We're also going to look at the water displacement properties of each frog. Knowing when to use a really aggressive frog and when to use a more finesse type frog is really important in drawing the strikes. There are about 5 frogs that I like to use that cover every situation that I like to throw a frog in. Let me walk you through the baits that I use and the reason I use them. Let's start with one of my favorite frogs first. In my opinion, the best all-around frog that covers every situation that I might encounter on the water, whether it be skipping, fishing in grass, or open water structure frogging, is the Strike King Sexy Frog. In my opinion, it has the best buoyancy, doesn't take on a lot of water. I have a lot of colors to choose from. It has a flat body on it, which allows me to skip it under docks, so it has a good profile. In my opinion, it's one of the better frogs. It has good water displacement properties. This bait tends to slap the water pretty good, gives it a good spitting motion, displaces a lot of water, so I can use it when it's in stained water, clear water. I can manipulate the bait really easily with my rod tip. Some baits don't walk that easy, but the Strike King Sexy Frog walks really easy with just little subtle movements of my rod tip. The Strike King Sexy Frog is probably my number one go-to. Spro Bronzeye Jr. It's a little bit smaller profile. In my opinion, the Spro Bronzeye takes a little bit more skill to walk. You need to be able to really throw the tip of the rod back at the bait to get the bait to walk properly. Otherwise, it has a tendency to just scoot along the surface. But the Spro Bronzeye, they pretty much pioneered or made famous the hollow body frogs. Of course, they're not the first ones, but I think they really did a good job of modernizing it and bringing it up to date. It's a great bait to use in grass. It skips really well. The only downside that I would say is it doesn't walk as easily as the Strike King Sexy Frog or some of the other frogs, but it's a good bait, good displacement, doesn't take on a lot of water, good buoyancy, great profile. On a scale of 1 to 10 on ease of use and how well it walks, I would probably give this bait somewhere around a 6 or 7. But the Spro Bronzeye is a great choice, and you got to have it in your box if you're going to be a frog fisherman. The next bait I'm going to talk about is the Spro Bronzeye Popping Frog. The Popping Frog, you can see, has a open, blunt mouth on it on the front of the bait, and that just gives the bait a lot of water displacement, pushes a lot of water. It's a popper, just like the old poppers and the chug bugs. But the difference is, since this bait is weedless and has a hollow body frog, the hollow body on it, you can skip it under laydowns, you can skip it under undercut banks, skip it under docks, and that's a place where fish are not normally going to see a popping type bait. So the Spro Bronzeye is a bait that you have to have in your tackle box. It's great to use around scattered grass or in just an open water situation where you really need to draw those fish in from deeper water or from a long way. If the water's a little bit more stained and you need a little bit more drawing power, the Spro Bronzeye frog, the popping frog, is a great bait to choose for those type of situations. This next bait is the Jackall Iobee. The Jackall Iobee is one of the most unique frogs, in my opinion, that's on the market. It has a much smaller, slender profile. You can see the body has a beveled belly to it, which is a little bit unique. This bait is what I would consider a very finesse type of frog. Of course, when you think of frogging, you think of a power presentation. However, the Jackall Iobee frog is going to be typically going to be a finesse type bait. Smaller in profile, beveled edge, does not displace a lot of water, has a very soft body. The body on this bait is very soft. Hookup ratio is really great because the body is soft on it. But the Jackall Iobee has more of, when you're working it back to the boat, it really has a snaking motion to it. Does not spit or pop whatsoever, which is what I think is an advantage. A lot of times I fish for wolfpack fish with a hollow body frog, and this bait is one of my go-tos because it's very finessey. I can get a bite on I can get strikes and blow-ups and get the fish to actually take this bait better than I can any other frog. Some of the downsides are it doesn't cast that well. It's fairly light since it's more of a finessey bait. Doesn't cast as far. It does not skip very well. The bait's very soft, so when it hits the water when you're trying to skip it, the bait has a tendency to foul up a little bit. However, it's a very important player in my tackle box because some of the positive things on it. With it being more of a finessey type of bait, I feel like I can draw the strike a lot better. Has very realistic colors. There's a lot of different colors that represent brim almost to a T. Most of the time with the frog, I'm trying to imitate a brim. So the Jackall Iobee, very good frog. Definitely a very important tool in my tackle box, and I think it should be an important tool in your tackle box as well. This next bait is the next bait I'm going to talk to you about is the It's Just Fat Frog. It's Just Fat Frog from Snag Proof. This is a great frog as well. Probably the easiest to walk, bar none. It has a little bit bigger profile. This bait is just a little bit bigger body, very flat. It walks easier and better than any frog on the market. Does not take a lot of skill to walk this bait. It pretty much does all the work for you. It's not real picky about your rod and reel setup. There are certain frogs that I feel like walk better with shorter rods because you really have to put a lot of muscle on it. But the Snag Proof frog is really easy to use, really user friendly. You can see it has a really good hook. The tails are more streamlined, and that's one reason that it walks really good. If you look on some of the other baits, you'll see that the tails on them are a little bit wider. This is a Strike King Sexy Frog, and you can see the tails are further apart, closer to the hook. Well, on the Snag Proof, they're a little bit closer together, and when they're closer together like that, there's less resistance, and that frees that frog up to really dart back and forth. Displaces a good bit of water just to be just a straight up hollow body frog, but the Snag Proof frog works really good. One of the downsides to it, since it's such a big profile, it does not skip very well at all. You can skip the bait, but this would not be a bait that I would give to a beginner, someone that's new to skipping frogs. I would not start off with the Snag Proof. I would start off with the Spro or the Sexy Frog. I would not start off with a Snag Proof. It takes a good bit of skill to get this bait to skip under docks and under laydowns and trees and so forth. But it's a great bait. You definitely want to have it in your tackle box as well. You know, when I'm out there frogging, typically I'm trying to imitate brim. That's typically what I'm going to be trying to imitate with all of my frogging presentations. However, a frog can imitate a lot of different things. Depending on the frog that you pick, it can imitate a brim. It could be an actual frog itself. It's typically when you're fishing around lily pads and aquatic vegetation, things like that. It can imitate a small bird. Fish are really bad about eating small little ducklings and birds that fall out of trees, little small baby birds. Frog can imitate that. It can be a shad imitation. A lot of guys like to throw it during the shad spawn in the spring. It could be imitate a snake, any kind of forage or anything that's not normally a water-bound creature. It can be an imitator of those things, as well as other fish and different things like that. So keep in mind the forage base that you're trying to target or imitate when you're picking your frog colors and your profiles of the different baits. You know, my rod and reel setups on my frogs, it can vary depending on how I'm going to use the frog. There's different situations. A lot of time you're going to be fishing aquatic vegetation, grass mats, tulies, and things like that. That's when I'm going to have a little bit beefier setup. I'm probably going to have a 7.6 or larger. That allows me to get a very long cast far back into the mats and grass and tules, and it gives me the leverage and power to most of that bait out of the structure. I'm almost always going to use braided line. 30, 45, 50 pound test braid is usually enough for frogging for me. When I'm flipping, pitching, I'm probably going to use a little bit heavier braid, but I do like this a little bit smaller diameter braid when frogging to allow the bait to go farther. I've never had a problem with 30 pound braid on frogs. Some guys will throw 65 or so, but I think you'll be fine if you have a medium heavy or heavy action rod. 45, 30, 45, 50 pound test braid, you're going to be just fine. That'll allow you to get plenty of distance on your bait. Using braid that has no stretch, so that's going to help you walk the bait and manipulate the lure without a lot of rod action. Now, as far as lengths, I use a lot of open water frogging. You hear me talk about open water frogging. I'm going to be fishing for fish that are feeding on brim or just literally cruising down the bank looking for trouble to get into. So my particular setup is going to probably be on the lighter side of most guys' frogging setups. I'm typically going to use a 7-foot to 7.2-foot medium heavy, something with a little softer tip, just in case I get that strike close to the boat. I can still drive that hook home with braided line, but the worst thing you can do with a frog or any type of braided setup is set the hook really hard and jerk slack in your line. And what happens is when you set the hook hard, that fish comes flying out of the water, you get slack in your line, and you're going to lose that fish more than likely. So I like that medium heavy just to absorb some of that impact just a little bit, so I don't jerk the fish up out of the water, get slack in my line, and lose the fish. A 7-foot, 7.2 is a great rod, so I'm not slapping the water with my rod tip, and I can manipulate the bait really good, get it to walk. I'm throwing slack in the line every time I work the bait, throwing that slack in that line, and that's freeing that bait up to really dart and walk back and forth. So my setup is going to be a little bit lighter, probably a little bit shorter than your typical frogging setup, depending on the location and the structure I'm fishing. Even though I'm open water frogging, I'm still going to use braid. Braid is good to get that hook penetration. This bait's weedless. The hooks are a little bit hidden. That's one of the beauties of it. I can skip it and get it around docks and trees and laydowns and bring it through that stuff and not get hung. So I still like to use that braid. Of course, braid floats. That keeps the bait very buoyant so it doesn't take on a lot of water, frees the bait up to walk really well. So I'm almost always going to use braid even in a clear water situation. These are the 5 frogs that work best for me in the environment and the waterways that I fish. As always, I encourage you to experiment with different baits, frogs, and techniques and find out what works best for you and the waters that you fish. I'm Brian Latimer. Thanks for tuning in and taking time to watch this video. I hope you guys learned something. I post a new video every Thursday. Make sure you come back next week for a new video on how to make you a better fisherman. Next week, we'll be fishing in Venice, Louisiana. You'll be able to experience with me one of my first trips to Venice, Louisiana, and we're going to just absolutely crush the redfish, grouper, speckled trout. It's one of the most action-packed segments that I'll probably ever do. Come back next week. I want you to see this trip.